Welcome to today's Nicaragua webinar entitled Revolutionizing Tourism, Nicaragua's Model to Benefit Communities and Travelers. My name is Barbara Larkham, and I'm one of your co-moderators today along with Nan McCurdy. We'll hear from our speakers in a few minutes, but first we have a few other comments and announcements. We want to thank Yoav Elenevsky for providing technical support. We also thank our many organizational co-sponsors who will be listed now in the chat. Feel free to use the chat function to offer comments throughout this event, but to keep it working in service of the webinar, we ask you to use it in respectful ways that don't distract from the program. Demeaning comments about an attendee, speaker, or moderator will not be tolerated. Today's chat monitor is Brianna Alvarado Ramos. Please direct a message to Brianna if you have any concerns about comments in the chat. But if you have a question for the speakers, please don't put your question in the chat or we may not see it. Instead, click the Q&A button and place your question there. We'll select your questions from the Q&A to pose to our speakers following their presentations. This webinar is part of a monthly series about Nicaragua. Please mark your calendars during this hurricane season for Sunday, August 24th for the next webinar, which will focus on CINAPRED, Nicaragua's program for prevention, mitigation, and attention to disasters, and how it contrasts with the U.S. system for doing the same. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrants within the next few days. When it's ready, it will also be posted on the website of the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition, which is nicasolidarity.com, and on the YouTube channel of the coalition. If you'd like to become more active in supporting Nicaragua's sovereignty and opposing foreign interference there, please join the International Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. You can check their website regularly for updates and new resources. And again, that website is nicasolidarity.com. You can also subscribe to the newsletter, monthly meetings, action alerts, and other notices from the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition at bit.ly/NicaSubs. That will be posted in the chat. So it's bit.ly/NicaSubs. The next general meeting is on Monday, August 11th. The coalition meets on the second Monday of each month at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're also putting some other links in the chat to subscribe to the NicaNet email list and Nica Notes and to download ebooks about Nicaragua. And now we turn to today's program. We'll hear from the featured speakers, followed by a question and answer period. Please do keep entering your questions in the Q&A throughout the webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Becca Renk, the co-organizer of the Casa Benjamin Linder delegations in which today's speakers participated. Becca has lived and worked in Ciudad Sandino, Nicaragua for over 20 years. Becca will introduce the other speakers. Welcome, Becca. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you for having us all here today. I'm going to share my screen so that we can all see some photos of Nicaragua. Over the summer, you've probably been hearing about Europe's anti-tourism protests. Even the US State Department has warned travelers to exercise caution amid a wave of Southern Europeans attacking tourists with water guns to draw attention to rising housing costs and environmental impacts of tourism. Much less in the news is Native Hawaiians' post-pandemic plea to tourists to not visit their islands. While tourism is the biggest economic factor in the islands, very few of the benefits reach the people of Hawaii. On the island of Oahu, 0 hotels are owned and operated by Native Hawaiians and only 1 on the Big Island. Increasingly, Native Hawaiians are refusing to work in the tourism industry. What are their concerns? Culture. Disrespect for local culture, such as stepping on burial grounds to get a better view of a sunset, and cultural appropriation, such as wearing sacred Hawaiian symbols like the hula skirt without understanding the cultural significance behind them. Environmental impact of overcrowding, littering, and damage to Hawaii's fragile ecosystem has led to valid concerns about damage to the environment by tourism. Economic disparities, with most businesses not being owned by the indigenous people of the island. Those who benefit from the tourist exploitation of the islands are not the people themselves, who are instead priced out of their homes. For those of us who love to travel, we should be asking ourselves, does tourism do more harm than good? For all its similarities to Hawaii, the beautiful beaches, vibrant culture, tropical flora and fauna, Nicaragua's tourism industry has key differences to those of Hawaii that manage to benefit both native Nicaraguans and tourists alike. Unlike Hawaii, where tourism has been developed by big business, Nicaragua's travel industry is being developed by Nicaraguans in an intentional way to put people and communities at the center of its policies. Nicaragua's tourism is developed under a model of sustainable community-based tourism, which seeks to welcome visitors while maintaining a balance of cultural, environmental, and economic factors to improve quality of life for local families and benefit small businesses. How is this done? In culture, in Nicaragua's tourism model, local communities are active participants, protagonists, as we say in Nicaragua, in the design and management of tourism activities. Most compelling for visitors is the opportunity this offers to experience Nicaragua's rich culture in an authentic and respectful way. This is commonly achieved through immersive experiences such as local homestays with families, cooking and sharing meals together, making traditional Indio Viejo, or learning to carve balsa wood figures, or learning traditional dances are all ways of showcasing Nicaraguan traditions and ways of life. In Nicaragua's model, communities can take pride in and preserve their cultural identity and share it with visitors in an authentic experience that lifts up their culture. Environmental conservation is often not prioritized because it's expensive and local communities lack funds. Inviting environmentally conscious visitors to enjoy nature's treasures in a responsible way can incentivize conservation to ensure continued visits and also create revenue to carry out conservation efforts such as maintaining trails and protecting wildlife habitats. This benefits both the visiting travelers and local communities, ensuring these resources are preserved for future generations of Nicaraguans. Economy. Tourism provides an alternative source of income for local communities, reducing reliance on destructive activities such as firewood sales for economic survival or internal rural to urban migration in search of jobs. Community-based tourism encourages the growth of local businesses from family-run guest houses to small-scale tour operators and craft markets. This economic boost helps create jobs and stimulates the local economy, ensuring that the benefits of tourism are felt throughout the community. Crucially, the Nicaraguan government supports these initiatives through extensive free training programs for small businesses to develop the quality of services on offer. Even tiny tourism operations can train their staff for free in everything from event planning to waiting tables to bird identification. According to Nicaraguan Tourism Minister Anasha Campbell, we believe that tourism enhances that understanding between cultures and also contributes to strengthening the culture of peace in all countries. Nicaragua is no exception. Lucky for travelers, that may be one of the few ways in which Nicaragua is not exceptional. With so many top-notch travel experiences available to the country, Nicaraguan tourism was booming in 2016 and 2017. Then it was dealt a series of hard blows, starting with the US-led and funded failed coup attempt in 2018, followed immediately by the COVID-19 pandemic, and then 2 Category 5 hurricanes. Though the country has struggled to recover, tourism in Nicaragua in 2024 was up 14.6% over 2023, representing 5.5% of the economy. National tourism represents 75.5% of the tourism industry. In 2025, Nicaragua has received many accolades. It made the top 25 places to visit by the world's most influential travel magazine, Condé Nast Traveler. It made the top 50 list of Travel and Leisure magazine, and it was number 14 on the New York Times list of 52 places to go in 2025, which said a darling of ecotourism, is ready for its next renaissance. Now we'll hear from some of the folks who've traveled to Nicaragua recently. I'd like to introduce you to Ken Yale. Ken has been an anti-imperialist, anti-patriarchal activist for over 50 years in a variety of organizations and movements. He lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, where he is currently a member of Jewish Voice for Peace and the Black Alliance for Peace Solidarity Network. Ken, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Becca. I would also just add that I have also traveled to 40 countries, 10 of which have been on similar kinds of social justice or solidarity delegations. And my most recent trip was in March with the Casa Benjamin Linder Brigade to look at the empowerment of women in Nicaragua. And I'm going to talk about this trip through the sort of three lenses of my own background. First, as an activist, as an educator, and as a world traveler. And to just sum it up in one word, I would just say, of all the travels that I've done, going to Nicaragua with Casa Ben Linder as an educator was one of the most powerful learning experiences that I've ever had. As an activist, was one of my most inspiring experiences in this extremely grim historical moment we're in. And as a world traveler, was one of the best planned and best organized trips that I've ever been on. And what stood out most for me is kind of summarized in this t-shirt. Try and, gotta take my blur off. Hold on one second. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that, but it basically, it says Sandino lives and the struggle for peace continues, which to me highlights Nicaragua's past century of resistance and revolution. And then on the back of the shirt, may or may not be able to see it, it highlights some of Nicaragua's most important achievements. 7th in the world in women's gender equity, which is actually now 6th in the world according to the World Economic Forum. 80% of energy use is renewables, free universal education and healthcare. What a concept. And indigenous and Afro descendants have communal title to 1/3 of Nicaragua's land. So through first my lens as an educator, I can read lots of articles and we can all watch webinars that have statistics like this. But traveling with the Casa Benjamin Linder delegation was really the best of experiential and popular education. It is totally different to see, to feel, and to experience Nicaragua for myself, and to be able to make the kinds of personal connections with peoples and organizations that would have been very difficult to make on my own, and to hear so many people's personal stories. In our delegation, we met with officials in a half dozen different cities, from women leaders in parliament to the director of the Ministry of Women, institutional leaders like the heads of health clinics, school programs, and individual family members and community members. And every day we had that opportunity to ask our deepest, most nuanced questions, to think critically about what we heard, to debrief with our fellow delegation members, and ultimately to make up our own minds about what we thought. And that, to me, as an educator, is the essence of powerful education. Through my lens as an activist, I've seen that there are many movements in countries that claim to be making progressive changes based on the proclamations of leaders, or maybe some of the formal legal changes that have happened, which unfortunately don't always actually filter down into how people experience those changes in their daily lives. And one of the most powerful things in our delegation was to witness the way that gender equity was actually being implemented at a family and community level. For example, there is a major campaign against violence against women and children. Over 400 women's police stations have been set up, and we met with many of those women. And that's a very different concept than the role of the police in this country, for sure. And that campaign, I believe they said something like 80,000 home visits. had already happened, where the police would actually go out, go home to home, talk about the laws, the culture, the issues related to violence against women and children. So that was very, very striking. We also saw what free healthcare and education looked like in visits to schools and health clinics. We saw the mass participation of people in the International Women's Day marches and the cultural celebrations. And that family community model was everywhere in Nicaragua. It was such a strong counterpoint to the US disinformation campaign to portray Nicaragua as this brutal, repressive dictatorship opposed by the people, and an incredibly hopeful and inspiring model of what's possible when a country which has just a fraction of US resources prioritizes the well-being of its people. And then finally, through my lens as a world traveler, I just want to say, first of all, just huge props to our trip leaders. Becca, who's moderating this, was one of them. She's a dynamo. She was not just leading the tour, but also administering the Casa Linder healthcare clinic and raising her family all at the same time. She provided simultaneous translation, which I'd never experienced before on a delegation, and it just really saves a huge amount of time to not have to wait every time somebody speaks, and made it much easier to maintain focus. And one of the biggest highlights for me was just kind of happened informally when the other trip leader, Harold Urbina, some people may know him as Shaggy, I got to spend the night with him. We were rooming together, and he just told me his whole life story, which was just incredible, starting with witnessing as a 6-year-old the triumph of the revolution and his lifetime association with the Sandinistas. So besides having great trip leaders, the trip was structured with just the right combination and the right balance of organized activities on the one hand, but also enough time to debrief with other people on the delegation and personal time to relax. And overall, the hosts, everywhere we went, were just super supportive and attentive to all of our personal needs, meals, health, lodging, whatever that was. So I kind of also, just to tag off of what Becca's slideshow was mentioning in the beginning, I know that I personally have always been very tentative about traveling to other countries for exactly the reasons Becca articulated, that, especially if you're going to a country that's suffering from US-imposed poverty, oppression, invasion, it feels like it's exploitive to go there as a tourist. But in this case, Nicaragua, the FSLN is strongly encouraging tourism, not just for, in addition to all the reasons that Becca articulated that were benefiting Nicaragua. It's also important to note that the US has waged this 50-year propaganda campaign and hybrid war against Nicaragua, as they do against any independent or socialist nation that resists US hegemony. And in the 70s and 80s, there were many, many international solidarity activists who came to see Nicaragua's reality for themselves. But I think in recent years, in addition to some of the factors that Becca mentioned in her slideshow, there's also the 9/11 happened, the war on terror, Iraq, Afghanistan, Gaza. I think the focus of a lot of people shifted to other parts of the world, and the FSLN really wants internationals to come, especially the younger generation. For us to be able to see for ourselves, to learn together, and hopefully to revitalize the solidarity movement. So I would just encourage everyone to find a trip on a theme that most interests you. I think there are about a half a dozen that Casa Linder offers, all on different themes, from women, health, cooperatives, environment. And just to really emphasize what Becca said previously, that this kind of travel is a win-win. It's a win for us as participants, and it's a win for Nicaragua. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ken. Very informative. Next up, we have Gayle. Gayle Nielsen lives in Minnesota, is a retired nurse and peace activist. She's also a mother of 4 and grandmother of 4. Gayle first came to Nicaragua through the Tucson, Arizona, Santo Domingo Chontales Sister City Project, and she's returned to the country 4 times since then. So, Gayle, you have the floor.
Gayle, you're muted. Still muted.
Okay. Not muted? Now I shall attempt to open my PowerPoint and share it. I think this is mine. No, it's not. This is mine. Okay. So sorry, folks. All right. Am I making progress?
Yes.
Okay. So we went on the bird brigade this winter in February, and that was another event hosted by Casa and Linder, and it was wonderful. I have been to Nicaragua several times before, as Becca mentioned, once to start a sister city, once to observe elections, and 2 times for the July 19th celebration. So this was the first time that I went for a vacation, and it was wonderful. The first day there, we went out to Becca's house and went through the forest in her backyard, and we saw a mot-mot, which was a thrill, the beautiful Nicaraguan bird, a national bird. And then we went to the clinic that was mentioned before, the Nueve Clinic. And the next day we started our trip around Nicaragua. We left from Managua to go to San Carlos, which is a city on the coast of Lake Nicaragua. If you're familiar with Nicaragua, there's 2 lakes. The big one to the southwest is Lake Nicaragua, and that's where we were going. So we got on a boat at San Carlos and went up the Rio San Juan River and came to a charming little town called El Castillo, stayed at the Victoria Hotel. I'm kind of a plant person, and this plant just amazed me, but I am not a photographer. This plant, the top of it was just brilliant red. It was at least 6 feet tall. It was very wonderful. We went to a fortress out there that Larry is going to tell you a little bit more about, and probably show you the same pictures while we were in that town, staying at the Victoria Hotel. Our guide, Laureano, knew everybody there. And I think he knows everybody everywhere, and he knew all the great places to go for food and souvenirs and all that kind of stuff. And that was one advantage to having a guide that was part of the community. In El Castillo, we went to a cocoa cooperative, and this lady showed us all the preparation that needs to be done for cocoa, the grinding and what have you. They do it by machines now, but this was an interesting, and we all left with some chocolate. This is the hotel that we stayed at when we got to the islands. It was just beautiful. It was on an incline, you know, so we were at the top, and you could just look out at the different cabins, and you'll see the solar panels there on the roof. These islands don't have any electrical plants or anything on them, so it's all generator or solar. We had electricity most of the times. Once in a while it would go out, like usually during the night, but it was not a problem. Murals all over Nicaragua, you'll see murals. They're just lovely. And this was sunset from our room on the island. And we went walking one night, and this was a toad, a big guy, and they were all over the road. That was interesting. And this was a bird brigade, but we saw a whole bunch of other animals while we were out there. You don't just go into nature and see birds. We just saw so much. And one thing, we took a walk around the island and ran into, not literally ran into, but a sandbox tree, which is a tree with a straight trunk that doesn't have branches till it gets on top, but it has these spikes all around it, so you have to be quite careful. And we found a seed pod from it, which was a little thing, reminded me kind of those little miniature pumpkins that you see in the fall, and it was segmented like an orange, and we thought it would be great for my son's specimen collection. He collects all kind of stuff. So we gave it to her and him, and my daughter was up at 5 o'clock one morning, and upstairs, everybody was upstairs, and she heard a sound down below that sounded like a gunshot, she said. And it was that seed pod popping open. It dehissed, dried out and popped open. That was an interesting thing, but we just saw all kinds of interesting things. And then we went to a neighboring island and saw a lot of artisans at work. We went to a place that had a beautiful art gallery of wooden and ceramic statues that were painted this beautifully. This gentleman was working, outside of his home, carving on this soft wood to make these fish shapes that were then finished up and painted for souvenirs. And we did get some swimming in on the beautiful lake. And remember, I said I'm not a photographer. These are orapendula nests. They're kind of like nests like orioles make in this country. They just hang down, but these are lots bigger because the orapendula is a lot bigger. We saw a lot of those birds. And this was our tour guide, Laureano. He was interesting, educated in the US as an economics major, and then came back to the islands where he was born and raised, and opened his hotel. He was the one who built the hotel and does this. So, petroglyphs we saw as we hiked around the island. We got to the top of a hill, and there were the petroglyphs. So we also saw petroglyphs out in the water that were very difficult to see. They were kind of in a cave, and they have become more and more difficult to see because of the rising of the water in Lake Nicaragua. And Laureano feels that is due to a lot of the agricultural runoff from Costa Rica that's on the bottom of the lake and then just raising the water level. But we went down the Papaturo River, I believe it was, to the Guadasus. I'm a dumb American. Guadasus Natural Reserve, at any rate. But here we are going down the river, and this was the guy who piloted our boat for us. And both he and Laureano were amazing the way they could see things. Caimans, that were in the water that hardly had a nose sticking up, and birds that anybody would have missed, and just all kinds of things. It was just really wonderful. And all along this
Gayle,
river, yes.
1 minute warning.
Okay, all along this river, there were these beautiful flowers. This was about the only real bird picture I got. That's a yellow-tailed oriole. And the bamboo grows pretty well there. Coconut starting to sprout. And this was a tree full of cormorants. And those mountains you see off in the distance is Costa Rica. We went to an island that was kind of a rookery for the roseate spoonbill, and there were some wood storks there as well. And a heron. I didn't know there were so many herons, white herons, tiger herons, boat-billed herons, more plants. And this is us walking inland on the reserve. And this is where I saw my favorite bird, which was a honey creeper. It was a beautiful bird. And an anteater. This is the anteater of Central America. We rented some kayaks and went up further on the river than where we landed. And this was Larry by his favorite tree. Big tree. You can see some dark dots in there. It's a two-toed sloth and her baby. And this was the orchids. Orchids all over. Usually they were up high in the trees, but this one was low enough that I could get a picture of it. We visited, then we went back to Managua, and our guide, Harold, who was mentioned earlier, took us to see this potter who was actually showed us how to make something on a wheel, but they were all videos, so we couldn't have that. This is some of his handiwork, just beautiful. I guess it's his father who really owns the place. This is a volcano that 23,000 years ago exploded, and now it's got this beautiful little lake in it. It's just gorgeous. And as we went around the volcano, we came to a place that they called a beach club, and it was this beautiful little place, very narrow, as you can imagine, very steep because it's the side of a volcano, but it was all terraced, and it had tables and restaurant, bar, changing rooms, just really wonderful. I could have spent the day there. And they had these floating docks out in the lake so you could go out and swim. This picture, I don't know this woman, I hope she doesn't mind, but I took it because the water is so clear you could see all the way to the bottom. It was just beautiful. It was beautiful, and it is a great way to vacation. I know I had friends from high school who knew nothing about Nicaragua. Their travel agent suggested they go to Nicaragua, and they went and had a wonderful time. They had a guide, and they got to know his family, and the guide took him anywhere he wanted to go, or he had some things for them to see too. But one day Mark wanted to go fishing, so he took him out fishing. They caught so many fish, the guide took some home, and then they didn't know what to do with the rest of them, so the guide found a restaurateur to buy the rest of the fish. You just don't have those kinds of experiences on most tours. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gayle. Wonderful. Beautiful to see some pictures. And I will also note to everyone that every delegation we do finds a way to get to that crater lake that Gayle showed us there. So that's definitely worth the trip. Next up, we have Geraldine Cawthorne. Geraldine is a retired teacher from Britain who's been active in solidarity with Nicaragua since the 1980s. Geraldine is active with the Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign Action Group in Britain. And I'll hand it over to you now. Geraldine, you have the floor.
We can't hear you, Gerald.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Becca, and thanks for the photos, Gayle. Lovely to look at. Okay, I've had the privilege of going to Nicaragua 3 times. First in the early 90s through the UK NSC with an environmental brigade to Solentiname, help planting trees in a tree nursery funded there. And the second time on the First All Women Brigade, where we were working out of a church community in West Lala up with 3 women's communities, and our group mixed cement, made bricks for a community home. And then again this time, courtesy of Casa Linder. I'm going to run through a quick, I was asked to talk about differences I found between then and now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the more obvious material ones, but I also want to talk about things that have stayed the same for me, to my great delight. When I went in 1991, the neoliberal coalition government had been voted in the year before, and I had women coming up to me and apologizing for the election results, but saying they'd had enough of the war. Obviously, structure was a lot more basic than now. Accommodation then was dorms, bunk beds, wood bed bases, sleeping on the ground or floor in hammocks. Water was limited or rationed. Electricity wasn't around. I think there was 1 generator on the island in Mancaron, but we used head torches, candles, and tilly lamps for eating at night or reading. Communications, I took a bundle of letters and documents over with me from the NSC to be given to organisations and people. I queued for half an hour at the telephone exchange in Managua to make 1 landline call back to Britain. And I think I sent some postcards. Travel was on foot or on a loaned open lorry. Also horses once or twice, and boats to the lakes, and occasionally the NSC Larder Neva, which we took tyres over and which would not so infrequently get stuck in mud or fording streams. The distance from Managua to San Carlos on the trip I did with Gary Naylor is 165 miles, and then the journey took all day and half of it was dirt track. Health on Mancaron, which was where we were based, the Puesto de Salud, the health post, was a little wood cabin, and inside was a head-high ledge with some generic medicines and vitamins, scales for weighing babies, and an AIDS poster, and that was it. And we visited a local hospital which had just 2 very worn out and stressed doctors and minimal supplies and equipment. There was a little school in Mancaron which had 1 room. I think there was a blackboard and 1 set of books. And many of the kids just went for 1 year because you bought a new shirt to wear for uniform, but it was beyond the reach of many families to buy a shirt the next year when the child got bigger. And then fast forward to 2025, I arrive at Managua Airport and I come out and I see loads of cars, great big trucks with US-style fenders and masses of small motorbikes driven by men and women who I know are doing motor mechanics classes as well. The roads are city roads, and there's the first flyover in construction over the city. By the time I get to Casa Linder, where I'm staying, I've got 2 WhatsApp messages from Nika numbers on my phone. And throughout my trip, I can post photos and write updates on Facebook to share my experiences with everybody. Water's not and I get to Ben Linder thing, probably I'll have to share, and it might even be bunk beds. And I'm shown to a double room with ensuite shower, basin and flush toilet, Wi-Fi, aircon, beautiful gardens with a fridge, washing machine, drying line and a hot tub. Plus personnel who, as the others have said, just couldn't do enough. I'd not long arrived when Omar, who works there, who knew I was going on the bird brigade, told me he got a zoom lens and could lend it to me if I wanted to for the birds. Hang on, I've got scribbled notes here because I'm going to. Yeah, the journey down to San Carlos this time took 4.5 hours on superbly surfaced roads, and the accommodation we had through the trips. Gayle showed you that hotel. If I was a young Generation Z thing and wanted a flash marriage, I'd book that hotel. It's just exquisite, and all along ensuite double rooms, towels, and in that hotel, little basket of toiletries and flowers for the garden on the arranged towels, all these little things. I don't do travel like this usually, so it was absolute luxury. And communications, WhatsApp as well is obviously a huge tool. When I visited Mancaron this time, I passed a modern single-story large building, which happens to be the health centre now. And I was lucky enough to meet with the doctor who is just arriving there, who's been there 5 years and staffs the place with a nurse. And they're available Monday to Friday, 8 till 5:30. And once every 3 weeks, they do outreach to the other islands for the people who have difficulty getting there. And again, WhatsApp's very useful for them in communicating and referring to the hospital on the mainland with anything that needs. There are now, I believe, 3 schools on the islands, one having secondary provision. And when I visited, just after I arrived early and had a couple of days before the bird brigade started, and I hadn't got any plans, so I thought I'd just lie low and acclimatise. But 48 hours later, I'd been taken up to Ciudad Sandino, met the powerhouses that are Paul and Becca, and I'd been introduced to the director of the hospital and a doctor and nurses, and travelled with them out to a rural school to see a macronutrition project. I'd had good conversations with the teachers there, and then watched the children in the playground running around at break in their smart school uniforms, knowing they got a free school lunch lined up daily, and that their families get financial support at the beginning of the school year for equipment.
Geraldine, 1 minute warning.
Okay. We also visited the university, where the presentations and discussions we have with students just mark what's being done with education. I want to talk a bit about the things that have stayed the same. Mobilization and just organization. On the Women's March that afternoon, we met informally with the mayor and deputy mayor of Ciudad Sandino. We had something on the Sunday and we're due to do something on the Monday, but Monday morning, Harold told us there was a change. They wanted to see us. And in 24 hours, they'd knocked up a visit that included visiting 3 nursery classes for hands-on experience, then 2 teenage vocational training in hairdressing and nail care, then back to the town hall for a PowerPoint presentation and questions and answers through lunch. When we visited with the women deputies for the National Assembly, the planned meeting went ahead, even though Gladys Baez, one of the most senior among them, had died a few hours earlier. And it's that organizing and everyone working together for improvement all the time, and the energy of that comes across. Also the care, warmth, care and support all the way through. The others have touched on it, but it really is there, from the passport and customs at the airport right the way through in every sense. And also the complete attention to taking care that we are safe all the way through. Before I went in 91, several people said to me, "Oh, watch yourself. Life is cheap in Latin America." I had people with machine guns accompanying us through the rainforest, and I got pickpocketed at the tube station on the way back. And it's carried through all the way through. So I want to say a big thanks to all at Casa Linder, to Harold for the most comprehensive walking tour of Managua, I think, possible. And also to Helen Newell and Hal Brown, Chris Baird, all at NSC, who facilitated that for me so many years ago, and I'll be back. And big love to Nicaragua. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. I really appreciate seeing how things have changed and how things have remained the same in the last nearly 20 years. Next up, we have Larry. Larry Fisk lives in Minnesota and has worked in Nicaraguan solidarity since the 1980s with the Tucson-Santo Domingo sister city relationship. In 1990, Larry organized an electoral observer delegation from Tucson. He's returned many times since and has also done electoral accompaniment work in Honduras, Venezuela, and in Nicaragua's sovereign elections in 2021. Larry, you have the floor.
You need to unmute, Larry.
Okay, I think I got it. Is my screen being shared?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I would just like to say first that I'm not much of a tourist. I do travel some, not enough. I could say some great things about Becca, but they've already been said. But I could say if anybody wants to go, for tourism or for a politically oriented trip to Nicaragua, you can go through Casa Linder and know that you'll have a great experience. So anyway, as far as the trip that we went on, the Bird Brigade, Gayle and Geraldine were on also. I'm not going to go into that a whole bunch. I'll just say this picture of me by this tree, I would take this trip back just to spend a few hours by this tree. I mean, I did not want to leave this tree. It was just delightful to me. There's just another view of the tree. This is going back to prehistory here. This is the ancient footprints in Managua, Alcohalinca. And the reason I'm going the historical route on this is that during the trip, when we went to El Castillo and the fortress there, I was really pretty overwhelmed. As part of Nicaragua I hadn't been to before, and I was pretty overwhelmed by the history that's transpired right there. And so I've just been thinking about it ever since the trip. Anyway, here's the ancient footprints that were in the volcanic ash in Managua, thousands of years old. We know people have been in Nicaragua for a long time. On our trip, we did see some petroglyphs out on the archipelago. So anyway, it got me thinking about the history, and of course we were on the south end of the lake, Costa Boca, and on the north end is the colonial capital city of Granada. And that took me to thinking about this fellow, uh, Hernando de Soto. I used to think about him because the part of Florida that I lived in as a teenager, he had invaded there as well. Anyway, he was uh, instrumental in the founding of Grenada around 1524, I believe. And then he had a public position in Leon, and he was very famous for um, capturing indigenous leaders and holding them for ransom. And he, of course, like most of these conquistadors, really was seeking extreme wealth. After he left Nicaragua, he was instrumental in the invasion and conquest of Peru and the Inca Empire, and became very wealthy that way. Went back to Spain, then ended up as governor of Cuba, and landed somewhere near Tampa, Florida, and then tormented the entire southwestern, what's now the United States. So that's the type of people who colonized Nicaragua. And at some point, the Spanish decided that they needed fortifications on the San Juan River to keep pirates, buccaneers, others who were interested in coming through to the lake and raiding Grenada. And I believe they built El Castillo, the fort there, in 1673. And then eventually the British, on at least two occasions in 1760, sent a large force up the river hoping to capture the fort, go through the lake, finish the overland routes to the Pacific, and establish a British route through Nicaragua and break the Spanish-American Empire into two parts. That attack was with several thousand soldiers failed, was eventually repulsed. But then when the American Revolution commenced, the Spanish allied with the North American colonists who were fighting against the British. And in reaction to that, the British decided they would try again to divide Spanish America by coming up the San Juan. There's Gayle looking at the San Juan from the fortress. And this person, Horatio Nelson, who's actually a great British naval hero, it was his first big action. He was not the commander of the whole force, but the naval commander coming up the San Juan. And in his portrait here in the background, you can see the fortress itself. And he did quite heroically come from the high ground in the back and captured the fort. That was in 1780. And they held it for a while, at least numerous months, but they were so decimated by disease, particularly yellow fever, that eventually overwhelming majority of them died and they had to withdraw. So it was ultimately not successful, but could have been history changing if they would have gotten through and established that route to the Pacific. Then if we fast forward through history a bit, and this is what really caught my imagination when we were in El Castillo, was thinking about that many thousands of gold prospectors, 49ers, we usually think of them as, passed through this river, through the lake, and overland from Rivas to the Pacific to go to the gold mines in California. This man, Cornelius Vanderbilt, came up with a scheme of steamship from New York or New Orleans down to the San Juan to the lake. He had a fleet of steamers on the lake also. Take them across, stagecoach to the Pacific, another fleet of steamers to San Francisco. And that was for a charge of $300. That started actually in 1850 and went on for a number of years. So when we were in the hotel in El Castillo, I'd look out the window and just imagine those thousands of uh, really colonial settlers heading out to try to stay rich in California, who then basically tormented the indigenous peoples of Northern California. Um, and Vanderbilt made millions of dollars off of this. Meanwhile, William Walker, the filibusters came to Nicaragua, and at some point, he actually seized Vanderbilt's operation to supply the filibusters reinforcements and supplies coming up to San Juan. So Vanderbilt actually allied with Costa Ricans in the attempts to neutralize Walker. And then when Walker was finally pushed out of the Nicaraguan situation, Vanderbilt could have reestablished his business of transporting the prospectors. There were a couple of companies doing it across Panama, and instead they paid him $40,000 a month to not start his business up. But he became very wealthy with the 49ers. So I was really overwhelmed with thinking about all those people, how it affected the world, how it affected the country that I live in, how it relates to imperialism. And this is the remnants, the stacks of one of Vanderbilt's steamers that would go across Boca Lake, Nicaragua. And actually, when I do travel in Nicaragua, wherever I am, I'm always thinking about the history. Like if I'm in Leon, I think about Rigoberto Lopez and the assassination of Anastasio Somoza. When I'm in Managua, like here up above looking down, I know that there's an area down below where the U.S. Marines used to train during the Marine occupation in the earliest 20th century. And Gayle and I knew a man named Bill Gandol, who was a U.S. Marine in Nicaragua when he was 19 years old. He told us, we raped, we murdered, we stole. And he actually administered election in a part of Nicaragua during a bogus election. And the Marine commander told him who should win. And he said when the votes came in, he just switched the tally, took the ballots, put them in a rowboat, rowed them out to the lake, and dumped them in the middle of the lake. One time when I was just wandering around Managua, somebody told me about the house of Julio Buitrago. Some may know the story of how it was a Sandinista safe house that was discovered, and basically a small army attacked him. There was one man in this house holding them off for many hours, and it was televised. The dictator thinking it would, show the people the power of the dictatorship. But what it did was enlighten the people to the sincerity, the tenacity, and the dedication of the Frente Sandinista.
Larry,
yes.
1 minute warning.
Okay, thank you. This is Gayle in Leon, of course, another very historic place. This is Gayle shopping in not that far away in Catarina, which was the site of where the U.S. Marines dragged the body of General Benjamin Zeledon through the streets on an ox cart. And Sandino, as a youth, saw that and certainly inspired him in his further anti-imperialist efforts. And not far away is Niquinomo, the hometown of Sandino. And Gayle and I went there. This is the house of his father. And there's a quote from Sandino, I want a free country or death. And I often think when I travel through Nicaragua, wherever I am, what happened here? We know we run into the monuments, the signs like this in Messiah of people, especially these young people who gave their lives to make Nicaragua what it is today, which is a wonderful place that everybody should go, where the children are eating, where people have health care, education, and is a light and hope to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. I really appreciate that, Larry, and appreciate the history added in. For those of you who have not yet listened to or read Daniel Ortega's speech from the 19th of July this year, he goes into the history of William Walker and Vanderbilt's highway. Right now, I am going to share with you some slides about visiting Nicaragua. We would like for you all to come visit us in Nicaragua. Casa Linder is the education project of the Jubilee House community. The JHC is a nonprofit founded to work with the poor in North Carolina in 1979. And our project, the Center for Development in Central America, has been working in Nicaragua for 31 years. In Ciudad Sandino, in the areas of healthcare, sustainable agriculture, sustainable economic development, relief and reconstruction, and education. In the area of education, our work focuses on educating those in the global north about Nicaragua and fostering solidarity. Since 2017, that work has been centered at the Casa Linder in Managua. The Casa is dedicated to the memory of Ben Linder, a young engineer from Portland, Oregon, who moved to Nicaragua in 1983 to contribute his skills to the popular Sandinista revolution. He was a clown and a unicyclist who worked to bring electricity to the war zones in northern Nicaragua. In 1987, Ben and two Nicaraguan colleagues, Pablo Rosales and Sergio Hernandez, were ambushed and murdered by the US-funded Contras. Today, the house is a solidarity center and a gathering space where its 12 murals can be appreciated by all. Volunteers, travelers, and solidarity workers staying at the guest house support this work, as income generated through guests supports the Casa and the sustainable community development work of our nonprofit in Ciudad Sandino. All of the comfortable rooms of the guest house are furnished with unique wood pieces made by a local workshop. We can host individuals and groups up to 20 people and gatherings, as well as organizing delegations, tours, and Spanish language classes. We host short-term delegations for groups of people who want to learn about the country and contribute their grain of sand to Nicaragua's struggle through volunteer construction, medical, and solidarity work. We also offer opportunities for individual volunteers. As part of this program, you will work closely with one of our projects and have the chance to learn about Nicaragua firsthand. No matter what skills you have, we can put you to work. You can also join us for fun and practical beginner or immediate Spanish language classes. Our model teaches half-day class and half-day practice in a community volunteer setting. We also offer medical Spanish for providers and healthcare workers. Our affordable all-inclusive rates include comfortable stay at Casa Linder, all meals and transport plus weekend excursions. For those interested in visiting, we still have space on an upcoming medical delegation in November of 2025. We're looking for providers, healthcare professionals, and translators, as well as general volunteers. And it's not too early to plan for next year. You can see upcoming delegations for 2026 on our website now. These include January 22nd through 21st, the Bird Brigade, birding in the Solentiname Archipelago. Join us to see some of Nicaragua's 700 species of birds. Over 10 days, we'll visit breeding grounds of migratory birds such as the roseate spoonbill, wood storks, and neotropical cormorants. To identify Nicaragua's, we will learn to identify Nicaragua's birds on walks and boat trips, visit a nature preserve with unique plants, trees, and animals, and learn about local conservation support efforts. The 7th of 15th through 15th of March, 2026, Power and Protagonism, Women in Nicaragua. Did you know that Nicaragua is #1 in the world for political participation of women and women's educational attainment? Come find out how Nicaragua made such gains for women in recent years. Join us on our journey to understand Nicaragua through the eyes of the women. Over 10 days, we'll learn about human rights for cis and transgendered women, meet with women entrepreneurs, explore health, education, and infrastructure programs that benefit women, understand women's initiatives to put an end to violence against women. Did you know that Nicaragua has free universal health care? Come find out how this small country has managed to drastically improve health across the board since 2007. We will have 2 health-focused delegations in June and October of 2026. Join us as students, public, and community health workers. We'll take a deep dive into Nicaragua's family and community health system. Over 10 days, we'll learn about the huge advances Nicaragua has made in healthcare, visit local hospitals and mothering weight homes, and provide hands-on healthcare at health fairs alongside Nicaraguan healthcare professionals. Come see Nicaragua's revolution firsthand and the role of solidarity in the revolution. Join us the 11th through the 20th of July 2026 for Solidarity in Action, Nicaragua's Popular Revolution. In our journey, we'll learn about Nicaragua's past, present, and future, the life and example of U.S. Solidarity worker Ben Linder. We'll visit microhydro projects that Ben worked on, learn about Nicaragua's revolutionary leaders and retrace their steps to their triumph over the Somoza dictatorship, and celebrate 47 years of the revolution with the Nicaraguan people. As always, if you don't see something that strikes your fancy here, we can set up a bespoke tour for you individually or for groups of any size. We look forward to seeing you in Nicaragua very soon. Thank you. With that, Barbara, I'll turn it over to you and Nan.
So, Nan, you're muted.
I apologize. For all speakers, what's the lesson we can most learn from Nicaragua? So you can just speak up. Ken.
Yes, I love that question. And I want to just say briefly that I had a previous engagement, so I'm not going to be able to stay till the end, but I really want to address this question. 3 things I would say. First of all, I looked this up last night. The United States has over 1,500 times the gross domestic product as Nicaragua, and yet somehow seems to be able to manage to provide universal free healthcare and education, which just highlights the lie that this country can't afford to do that for people, and really highlights the greed and bankruptcy of this system that we live in that uses resources for the benefit of the wealthy at the expense of the world. Similarly, with the kinds of achievements around gender equity, renewable energy, those kinds of changes, all with enormously few resources and complete and under a 50-year hybrid war. Secondly, as activists in this country, I think that we really tend to focus sort of on organizing people through ideas, articles, webinars, which often attract people who are already somewhat sympathetic or already converted. And I think what was so striking to me in Nicaragua was this family community model that people have been talking about that really addresses people's material needs, not just kind of the realm of ideas. And also as part of that, after the neoliberal government went out of power, Nicaragua has been going through a reconciliation process with some of the enemies of the revolution. And my understanding is that that even people who might not support the Sandinistas per se were able to see the ways that people's needs were able to see and respect that people's needs were being addressed by the government. And the third thing and final thing is that I think the lesson is that another world is possible, as grim as things look. And I think that's exactly why why Nicaragua and other countries that resist U.S. hegemony or move towards a socialist model are under attack, because that is a threat to an imperialist capitalist system. But Nicaragua is showing us that resistance and persistence in the face of enormous challenges makes another world possible.
Thank you, Ken. Would anyone like to add to that? Geraldine? You're muted.
Yeah, I mean, as well, I came this year. The Bird Brigade obviously attracted me like mad because it was a chance to get down there. And I was lucky to meet Emilia and Arsenio, who I stayed with 34 years ago. Sadly, Juan Garcia Maria were on the mainland, and although Lariano made the huge effort to take us round to the house, the day we went, they'd gone to the islands, so I have to come again. But the other reason I came was I knew I wanted another example than what's going on in Britain at the moment, and we're pretty similar to the US. You know, we've got, you've got Palestine Park in Managua. Here, we've recently arrested 90 people over the last 2 weeks just for standing with placards showing they support Palestine action, which the government's decided to ban, although it doesn't meet the terrorist group because it's never done any harm to people. And the government's now had its hands slapped by the United Nations, I think, so we'll see what happens there. The lived experience of being in Nicaragua is just, you can really get that concept of working towards well-being for everyone. And I've always believed that if you don't have health and education right in the country, the rest doesn't matter. And Nicaragua's out there doing it, as they've said, with minimal resources. That's what struck me the first time I went, how much they could do just through political will and organization with a smidgen of what we take for granted in the West and what we can learn from. And it's looking for what you can learn, I think, there, and hopefully apply back home. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Anyone else?
Say that, those of us who've seen Nicaragua when things were really bad, when people were hungry, when people were under attack. I myself experienced a counterattack on a riverboat on the Rio Escondido in 1988. And to see people bleeding and dying before your eyes. And what Nicaragua represents to me is like hope, that people struggled through those times and are building a decent, caring society. I go there so I can feel better, so I can believe in people and know that we could do it. We have to do it for the kids. We're going to do it.
Well,
we don't have any other questions. We need some more questions. Oh, Becca. After Becca, we need more questions.
And I'll add a little bit too to an answer if people don't mind. Go ahead, Becca.
I was just going to say that I think that sometimes, especially with the way things are in the rest of the world, coming to Nicaragua can be a little bit of a respite. It can be necessary to gather strength for the battles that are being waged in the United States and in the UK, and sometimes coming to Nicaragua to just breathe freely for a little bit and gather your strength again to go back. It can be important, and I definitely think that experiencing Nicaragua and seeing how things are working here currently can fill your cup in order to go back. So those things are also necessary.
And I'll just add my thought that some observations from my trips, I've seen how much participation by people there is in the country. And I'm thinking in particular about the webinar that we'll have next month, in which people, kids in school, people in communities across the country are taught in advance how to prepare for hurricanes, for example, and they have supplies set up in advance and plans in place all over the place. That's just one example. Same thing with health brigades. If there's any kind of concern about a particular health challenge, that there are door-to-door brigades that go out, that kind of thing. There's just a lot of participation, which I think is a different definition of democracy from what we often think of in the United States when we think about voting, which happens so seldom. So are there other questions?
Well, I found a question that is not in the Q&A, but it's from Helen in the chat, and she's asking, I guess, Becca, is there going to be a delegation with the focus on cooperatives?
We had hoped to do that delegation in 2025. We were working with some folks in the US that organize around cooperativism, and with the regime change in the US, we haven't been able to, I think their priorities changed, and we haven't been able to set it up yet. If anyone though is interested, contact me, with a minimum of probably 4 or 5 people, we could put a delegation together. And we have contacts to do cooperative delegations. We've also had some interest in trade union delegations, and it might even be possible to combine those two to look at different models for the economies. So we're open to organizing with those. What we need is some help, in the US or UK or wherever else folks are, recruiting people to come on the delegation.
Okay,
Please,
well,
a few more questions.
well, I think if we don't have more questions, we could just, which I don't see that anybody has entered anymore. We could do a final round where each speaker could take a minute to just add any thoughts that they haven't had a chance to say. Okay. Becca, do you want to go ahead and assign an order of speakers to that?
Sure. Larry and Gayle, why don't you add any thoughts that you have?
I thought what we saw was beautiful, beautiful country, wonderful people, so comfortable everywhere you go. You're not worrying about crime or really traffic accidents or anything. It was just a wonderful place. And I always think, as was kind of mentioned sooner with the revolution, that there are people there today walking the streets that lived through that revolution. They've got wounds from that, and it just boggles my mind, because you think of revolution as something that happens a long time ago, and this was just very recent.
I'd just like to say the friendliness and hospitality of the people is just extremely impressive and heartwarming. And I remember I was leaving the country in I think it was 2011. No, it was just a year and a half after the Sandinista got back into power, and I was driving out of the country into Honduras, and there was a billboard of Danielle saying, well, workers, all you have to do is lose your change or something. But the country had been so devastated by wars and then by the neoliberal years that I thought, geez, I'm so glad the Sandinistas are back in power, but how are they going to do this? And my daughter and I went back 3.5 years later, and it was the closest thing to a miracle that I've ever seen. I swear, people just looked better dressed, better fed, even looked to me like they stood up straighter, were proud. I think that Nicaragua is just an example for everyone.
Ken, do you want to add your thoughts?
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to just maybe add a little bit the thought about the historical perspective here. And I was lucky enough to go to high school 1967 to 70, when I was convinced as a 19-year-old that the revolution was 10 years away, whatever revolution meant to me as a 9-year-old. And like many people sort of, have gone through the cycles of hope and depression and things will never change and all of those kinds of things. And living in this moment, very easy to be just extremely depressed and overwhelmed on a minute by minute level. But I think there is, in addition to everything everyone has said, there is really something about the ability of Nicaragua to sustain itself over 50 years against the most powerful military, sociopathic, psychopathic regime that has ever existed in human history, dedicated to trying to destroy it. And yet here people are 50 years later, coming through that and doing, you know, in a process, and to actually realize that, you know, that process of change is very disappointing, that it doesn't correspond to that the timeline of change doesn't correspond to the timeline of our mortality, but to also know that this is a multi-generational process over time, and to see a whole country which is mobilizing to create a different kind of society. That to me is the hope. And that's about the best we can do, is to connect with people here and around the world that are sharing those values and working towards that. I think that's about the best we get.
Thank you, Ken. Geraldine, do you have final thoughts you want to share?
Sorry, I'm relatively new to Chromebook and I kept pressing the wrong unmute. I'd amplify what they've both said. I didn't cry at the airport when I left this time. Before, I just used to be sobbing walking out to the air thing, and it was nothing except the tenderness with which people treated us. And the guys would say, "Come back and see us soon," and you'd just be crying. And then you get on a plane and there'd be people and there'd be other things coming in. And it's what you, yeah, it's the lived example towards well-being that I bring back here. Several friends, when I got back, said, "Oh, I bet you feel really depressed coming back." I said, "No, because I know what I'm coming back to, but it's holding on to the examples and keeping those." And what Ken just said, I try to avoid media as much as possible, but just enjoy conversations with like-minded people, because that's what matters. It's the connecting and the going forward. It's much harder where we are, because we are in, we're just deluged with ghastly stuff. We had a thing the other day where there've been people demonstrating outside a hotel with asylum seekers in Epping, East London, and then false word got out that there were seekers, a sister hotel in Canary Wharf, and they all turned up there and there wasn't. It's just horrendous. But you don't get any of that in Nicaragua. And what is also encouraging is the mobilization of young people in Nicaragua. You get the parades and they're all there on motorbikes and scarves and involved and active and formation's the French word, but that's happening. And I don't think we're doing enough. And it's how we do it in our countries, very much. But just huge gratitude, huge humbling, and huge appreciation for all Nicaragua's given me.
Thank you, Geraldine. I think that all of us can say that it is different to hear about Nicaragua as it is to come see for yourself. And if you've been here before at different times, coming and seeing now is a good time to come, with all that's happening here that's so positive and all that's difficult in so many other parts of the world. That's not to say that Nicaragua doesn't have its difficulties, but it is beautiful here. And I will just add, one of the things that warms my heart is the fact that there's so much internal tourism within Nicaragua now. Thank you to the beautiful roads that we have around the country now, Nicaraguans are able to travel places that they couldn't before. Prior to get down to Limay, the bus trip was 11 hours on a bus through terrible roads. Now the spot that was halfway that was 5.5 hours from San Carlos is now 45 minutes from San Carlos. The roads are just very, very much changed. And with the new buses that have come in from China, there's beautiful new buses that will take you in 8 hours across to Bluefields and 6 hours to Pearl Lagoon. And Nicaraguans are for the first time discovering parts of their own country that they hadn't been able to see before. And it's lovely to see that this development brings everyone up and benefits everyone, so that it's not just foreigners who are able to see these beautiful places, but also Nicaraguans who can enjoy the beauty of their own country and get to know some of the other cultures in this very diverse country, some of the cultures that they didn't grow up with. And that's just a lovely aspect of it as well. So on that note, back to you, Barbara.
Nan has volunteered to answer another question that just popped in. Nan? You're muted.
There we go. I apologize to everyone. So I'm going to give a short answer and then see if Barbara and Becca would like to say a few words. This is from an anonymous attendee. A friend of mine had lived in Nicaragua as a musician and supported the Sandinistas for many years. Since 2018, she has heard from a number of Nicaraguan friends who are convinced that President Daniel Ortega has become a dictator. Any political observations by attendees? You know, I'd say that any country you live in, there may be a few people, there may be half the populations or more who don't like the president. You know, you're not going to have a country where everyone likes the president. But I would say that the facts are in 2021, he won 75% of the vote, and 65% of people who could vote voted. All of the polls show him with more than an 80% approval rating. Personally, I find him to be an amazing leader. He gives speeches very frequently. He doesn't use any notes. And the big thing, as people who I've met from various organizations have said, the proof is in what you see in Nicaragua. There have been so many improvements. And all of the banks, international banks that loan money to Nicaragua that right now are not loaning money because of US sanctions, they all over the last 7, 8 years have said that Nicaragua is the best country in terms of transparent project execution. Now, what does that mean? That means it's the least corrupt. So that's just a few words. That's what I would say. Barbara, Becca, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
Becca?
I would just say two quick things. One is that, like Nan said, you know, for those of us who live here, I think, and those of us who work with very impoverished populations who are still struggling, our touchstone is always, how are the people that we work with doing? And they are, in fact, doing much better, and that is continual all the time. And so that is really the bottom line for me. But I think it's also important to note that in Nicaragua, we believe that democracy, you know, yes, there's the elections that Nan mentioned with 75% of the vote, but also democracy is a lot more than just elections. And this is a country where everyone you talk to in government, the favorite part of their job, and this goes all the way up to the presidency, is going out and talking to the people. They go door to door and talk to people. They go to community meetings and talk to people. These are ministers, cabinet members. They are out on the streets talking to people. And so there's a lot of opportunity for people to make their voices heard as well. Anytime there's a strategy that happens, the new education strategy that was set and written up at the end of last year, they spent 6 months talking to everyone all over the country, from students to teachers to parents to administrators, to figure out what was going right and what was going wrong in education and what needed to be changed in their strategy for the next number of years. And that is just in education. This happens everywhere. So I don't know any dictator that consults with the people all the way from the ground up on basically everything that happens in the country. So
I don't have much to add to that. I already said my piece a few minutes ago talking about some of the preparations for hurricanes and other disasters and the door-to-door with health brigades. That's part of the participation that Becca was just referring to again, I think, and part of the democratic process in the country. Well, I guess we have reached the end of our webinar. This was great. Thank you to all the speakers. They were so interesting. And I've been to Nicaragua a whole lot of times, but you've inspired me that I definitely want to come again. and participate in one of the Casa Benjamin Linder delegations, which sounds very worthwhile. So I encourage other people to do the same. Nan, do you have a final word before we sign off?
I don't, but thank you for asking. Thank you to all of you for being with us, both the panelists and the participants.
Okay, bye now.